Hi class, welcome to week 2. I'm going to be talking with you about structural and strategic family therapy, which are two modes of family therapy that are very commonly used. Um, their theories to me are very practical, especially when you're working with clients. I really do find them applicable, easy to use to some regard, um, and I think they work for an over-encompassing group of people. um, which is nice because not every theory works with different types of people. So, granted, though, like I mentioned earlier, with anything, you have to make sure it fits with you and what you feel comfortable with because that's really important since you're the one implementing the model. So, I'm going to start with structural family therapy. I personally really like structural family therapy. Salvador Minuchin is one of the key players with this form of therapy, with this modality. And one of the main things here is boundaries. And boundaries are very important in families. Boundaries are very important in any kind of relationship. If you actually get a chance, the Cloud and Townsend book called Boundaries is a great book and just really describes how your life is meant to be like a house with a yard. And at least in California, what separates our homes are fences. And some people, um, if someone were to come and take care of your so-called house, um, and you didn't have a fence, you wouldn't know where your property line ends and the neighbor's begins. And wouldn't know what to take care of or how to take care of it because you don't know what you're supposed to do or not supposed to do. The fence shows you what's yours and what's not yours. Same with our lives, right? There's some of us that have really good boundaries and people can see in our yards, we can see out, we can say yes, we can say no. Other people have no boundaries. So people come and party on their yard and they're left picking up trash. Other people have huge boundaries that are like jail prison walls, and they can't see out and no one can see in, and sure they're protected, but they're also limiting themselves. And in families we see these kinds of things. There's rules. There's rules of engagement, right? Like war almost. There's ways they do things. It's how close they are, how not close they are, how disengaged they are. Um, it shows who's in charge, what's the hierarchy. And hierarchy doesn't necessarily mean it can mean that the kids are in charge. It can mean one of the grown-ups is in charge. It could be a fight for power amongst people. And in this form of this theory, you're in structural, you're looking to kind of figure out what they are and then address some of those things. So navigating how they live, what their life looks like, what are the rules, um, and then trying to figure out what would be healthy for them because boundaries are needed. Um, we want boundaries in a sense that allow us to be an individual, but also have us be a family. And that shows flexibility. Um, so which is nice to have in a family. Not all the time do you see these things, and you have families who are either enmeshed or totally disengaged. And the boundaries are able to show. Sorry, you're seeing my text messages here pop up, and I apologize. Um, Boundaries allow us to show, we can be who we are as people, but I also want to be close to you and engage with you and have contact with you. So there's more flexibility. Okay, so enmeshment, again, they have too strong of boundaries, and it might cost everything. So you might see a family, for example, that's enmeshed. We have family secrets. Everything stays within this family. Not a lot of outsiders come in. So when you're talking about families where there's already in-laws, the in-laws may always feel like an outsider, never included. Um, just it can be very, very unhealthy. A disengaged family can be too autonomous in the sense that everybody does their own thing. This might be a family no one ever eats together. They're all in separate rooms. Nobody knows what goes on, and there's not as much emotional connection. So we want more of the more normal boundaries, which normal is such a lame word because normal is so subjective. But that's what we're looking for. So a therapist will do enactments, okay, and that's reenacting things that are happening in the home. This is really interesting to watch. It's able to see how interactions are happening behind closed doors in your office, and it can kind of be very eye-opening to the clients when they do these things. I've even had reenactments where I have people play different parts, and it's interesting seeing how someone, like let's say a child, how a child plays a parent, and then the parent plays a child, and it's very interesting for them to see how they think the other person acts. But this is a way for the therapist to better understand communication, what's going on in the family, the structure. It's a way to try to figure out the problematic behavior, see the hierarchy. The goal would be to restructure how the family is doing these things. Hint, structural family therapy, right? We want to restructure things. Again, Mnuchin, Aponte, Goldberg, big players in this theory. So we have different phases. So again, with any therapeutic relationship, we want to build alliance. Your clients don't feel comfortable, they're not going to want to talk to you. Huge. So join the family, accommodate to their style. Again, we want to figure out the structure of the family. We want to evaluate boundaries and hierarchies. We want to address the problems, okay, and then we want to figure out different ways to diminish them. And then we would want the entire family present. Now, occasionally with family therapy, you might break off into different portions of the therapy. So you might meet with the couple, you may meet with the children in a way to try to better understand what's going on, to help to achieve goals, strengthen maybe couple boundaries, especially if the hierarchy is off and the kids are in charge, strengthen those boundaries to have better outcomes. This is all very helpful within a family because people, they don't know what to do. They keep repeating the same patterns. This might be a way to bring in some perspective and kind of restructure and change the dynamics. So the therapist joining with them helps build this alliance, which will help them with working together. The therapist joins to their style, maybe allows some spontaneity, maybe throwing in some different situations in there to kind of make them think about things. The therapist may use own self to relate to the family, sometimes bringing in own personal situations, but again within proper, it would be appropriate, right? Do whatever it takes to make things change. Again, everyone working towards the same goals, okay? So again, we're working towards the goal of restructuring the family to bring the family closer together. We're working on the boundaries, the hierarchies, the family development. We're trying to strengthen things as a family. So we want boundaries between everyone in the family, the parental system, and the couple, effective parental hierarchy, meaning the kids aren't in charge, okay? And a family structure that allows the person to be a healthy individual, but as well as a part of a member of a family, which I think is really good, in our culture. I think sometimes we hear that kids should be first, and honestly, I think even myself, I thought that at a younger age. But now, as I got older, and just from a biblical perspective, just seeing that, what needs to come first, one is the Lord, but two is, me and my husband, because if we aren't on the same page, everything else is going to crumble. And I think that's why we see so many marriages fall apart once kids are out of the house, because so much of the focus is on the children. They lose sight of each other. And the reality is, hopefully, your kids grow up and become adults, and move out of your home eventually. And what's left is just you and your spouse. And really, the hope is that you're with your spouse a whole lot longer than your kids are in your home. And so to invest in a relationship and to invest into a marriage is going to help everyone in the family. So that's why, having that hierarchy corrected and put in its correct place, and seeing where powers lie, and putting powers in the proper place, really does help the overall flow of the family. This is a key intervention, as I mentioned, the enactments. Using to restructure family interactions. With this, you could show what happened and then restructure restructure how, if they had done things differently, maybe what the outcome would have looked like, can be very eye-opening for people. Very, very eye-opening. So phase one, listen to the interaction, listen for rules, assumptions, um, you know, asking them what happened the night before, um, show what happens when someone's defiant. Again, redirecting problem transactions, so stopping family members from interrupting, speaking to one another. One time I had this minor, she would interrupt all the time her parents. And so I had to constantly tell her to sit on her hands, because when she sat on her hands, it caused her to stop before she just blurted out and interjected. And she was definitely a kid that did that all the time. So that was helpful to have her sit on her hands. Rearranging chairs to increase or decrease emotional closeness. So, trying to figure out ways for them, even in your room, to be more engaged and be aware of each other. Systemic reframing, again, highlights what's going well in the family, piece together members' descriptions of problems, and reframing to a broader systemic dynamic. So assess broader interaction patterns, so complementary relationships, hierarchy, boundaries. So look at what's working well, what are some things that maybe need to be improved on, and then trying to re-describe what the problem is, so they can see it from maybe more of a big picture. And this is interesting because you're going to have, very different ages in the room. Not a bad thing. And if they're working on a team, it might feel more, that in itself could change things, right? They're working together, trying to solve problems, all feeling heard, all feeling understood, from the adults to the children. It kind of may motivate them to want to have a change, because it feels like we're working on this together. So some of the techniques used in making boundaries, the therapist is actively talking and setting up boundaries. Therapist interrupts habitual interaction patterns, allows members to experience underutilized skills and abilities. The therapist is definitely involved. And the therapist will be challenging some of these worldviews, like the kids come first. I mentioned that. If I give here, you should give there. It's better for the kids for us to stay in this unhappy marriage. Just really trying to challenge some of these things to help grow and develop the family and maybe reprogram some of their thinking. So again, very, very good model, very practical, easy to use. I think with this model, one thing I remember very clearly from my exam, my state licensing exam, structural and strategic family therapy were brought up a lot. So becoming familiar with these models, I think, would be very helpful to you, just because I think they're very common and widely used. Now we're going to go to strategic, right? And this can get kind of confusing because we have strategic, we have structural, they sound the same, they do kind of similar things at times, but they are very much different. We're looking at prescribing, we're trying to interact problematic behavior. This is where we get the terminology prescribing the symptom. The directives are directions for the family to complete a specific task. You want to bother systems and create new ones, to get people out of ruts with the smallest change possible. Okay, you talk about Jay Haley, he's very popular. You hear about him a lot. So there's 5 initial stages. There's social stage, problem stage, interaction stage, goal setting stage, and task setting stage. The initial contact is usually made by the phone. We're getting information about the family. So strategic positioning, the therapist's role, the therapist is very involved in this sort of model. The family benefits from joining together and not liking therapists, because a therapist can be very harsh, straightforward, and the therapist can be that role of a person, where they can be kind of the hard person and then soften as time goes on, and it's okay for them to not necessarily 100% like the therapist, but the therapist is calling out things, behaviors, things that need to change, all that kind of stuff. So there's 6 different ways to think about a problem: involuntary versus voluntary, helplessness versus power, metaphorical versus literal. There's a lot of metaphor used sometimes in this theory. Hierarchy versus equality, and hostility versus love. So symptoms indicate a stage of life problem which a therapist can use to identify where and how to intervene. So there could be a lot of different life stages, right? Person may have difficulty transitioning to a new phase. Family must renegotiate balance and independence, like we kind of talked about that in the last theory. The family hierarchy definition: who has the influence and in what arena depends on, and in what arena, and this can depend on the culture of the family. So the therapist needs to observe interactions. You can't determine some of these things by just one interaction, so it needs to be observed. Patterns of hierarchy can be used to develop interventions. Parent-child hierarchy, which we've talked about before, and what's working and what's not working. So we want to increase the family's ability to love and nurture, not dominate and control. So we're really trying to make sure that they're loving one another, not just trying to control one another. So the goals are no predefined set of long-term goals other than to promote change. We want change. The ultimate goal is to help clients find ways to love without dominating. And I think we see a lot in family, right? That need to dominate, the need to feel like in control. In reality, and the reality is we can't control anybody else. Okay? So those are some things that we're looking for. So we want to correct the couple of family hierarchy, reducing intrusion, reuniting family members, changing who is helpful and how, and repenting for an injustice and forgiving. We want to increase compassion and unity. So there can be straightforward directives used when a therapist has power and influence, and then there can be indirect directives used when the therapist has less power. Okay, and that might be when we use some paradoxical type interventions. Straightforward directives can be target a small sequence of change, motivate the family, give precise, doable instructions, request a task report, review the task. Indirect ones can be paradoxical interventions, which is prescribing the symptom. This is a very odd intervention, it sounds, but it seems to work with people. So for example, if a problematic behavior is like they argue all the time, prescribing the symptom might be, I am giving you the homework to argue every single day. And the family may look at each other and think, that's really odd. Well, when prescribed the time or the ability to do that every day, they might realize how ridiculous it is and realize, wait a second, we don't need to argue all the time, or I don't like arguing all the time. And it might help them to think and want to change. Sounds strange, works really well. Works really, really well with people. And then, of course, metaphorical tasks used when it's not appropriate to, or when it's not appropriate to explicitly address a problem. Pretend techniques, fake it till you make it. So even though it doesn't feel comfortable, try doing it. Again, ordeal therapy. Ordeals used when clients feel helpless in controlling symptoms. So again, a lot of direction taking, strategy, in trying to make change, with the goal being that we want change and we want people to feel loved. And if we are able to do that, then we're feeling successful, hopefully as a family, but also as a clinician, it would be a success, right? Even if it's a small amount of change. Small change is hope for larger change and hope for longer lasting change. And giving them the tools that they can readjust and do these things while they're a family, that they won't always have to come to therapy to do these things, but they learn skills and tools to do these things. Now, again, if things come up and they ever have to come back, that's fine. But we want to hopefully leave them with some sort of tool belt that they can do some of these things on their own as well. Both of these theories, great theories, very practical, easy to use, and people really tend to buy in and enjoy them. So I hope that this is helpful, gave you some insight, a little more depth from a person hearing it. Like I said, I use both of these theories. I think knowing and understanding your families is helpful to know which kind of modality you're going to go with. But I think these are both very practical and easy to use. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I hope you're well. We're on our way. Thank you so much.